It's January 22nd, 1984. 70 million Americans are seated in their homes watching the largest televised event, the Super Bowl. It's the third quarter and tensions are high, but just then the broadcast is interrupted by a commercial break. And what came next would be remembered far more than the football game itself. Emerging on the screen is a scene set in a dreary industrial building. People are marching down a tube, and in the background, echoes of a voice can be heard glorifying the information and ideology.
Garden of pure ideology.
A flash of color appears, a woman wielding a sledgehammer running towards the voice. The hordes of soulless, gray men march into the room where a face speaks to them. The masses stare blankly and listen to a message espousing the virtues of conformity.
One resolve, one cause.
Before the security can apprehend her, she hurls the sledgehammer at the projection, destroying the face, shattering the illusion, and freeing the people.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
The advertisement was based on the novel 1984, bringing to life George Orwell's haunting vision of a government that monitors and controls people through technology. And in their portrayal of this dark future, Apple set out to change personal computers forever. In a time when most advertisers were solely focused on delivering a product to consumers, Apple delivered a message. The Macintosh offered the first window into the computer with a graphics-based interface and the ability to navigate that space with a mouse. At the same time Apple's personal computer revolution was occurring, another, more hidden revolution was unfolding behind the scenes. Unlike the commercials seen by 70 million people, this other revolution was taking place in relative darkness. Expanding across the globe was a network of information connecting computers and databases. Nobody knew it at the time, but the seeds of the future were planted with Apple's 1984 commercial in more ways than one. Apple would go on to play a vital role in the development of personal computers, and the internet would grow into a global communication network the likes of which no one could have imagined. But underlying all of this, the advertisement that was made to serve as a warning instead became a prophecy. To understand how Apple started a dark age of the internet, we must start with the source of their creation. In the early 1960s, the US government began work on a project that connected computers to an invisible network. At the same time, in response to the conformity of the 50s, a movement of counterculture, rebellion, and freedom captivated America. Open access to psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD fueled a creative renaissance of music and activism. To the hippies, psychedelics served as a portal for the mind into a new world of perception, freeing themselves from societal norms. Ushering in this new wave of culture were artists like the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, Jimi Hendrix, and Bob Dylan. Beyond their free love and anti-war sentiments, these artists were known for going against the grain. Also a part of the counterculture were intellectuals like Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna. With a background as a psychologist at Harvard, Timothy Leary opened his own school of thought, marrying Tibetan spiritual practices with academic studies on psychedelics and their effects on consciousness.
Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
As a young anthropologist, Terence McKenna was similarly fascinated by Tibetan spiritual practices. From Nepal to the Colombian Amazon, McKenna studied shamanism and the effects of psychedelics on cultures across the world.
What the psychedelics do is they dissolve boundaries. They dissolve the illusion of separateness.
Psychedelics were used by the artists and intellectuals as a bridge to different ways of thinking. At its core, the counterculture movement represented a wave of radical idealism.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
By the early 70s, Nixon's war on drugs cracked down on the use of psychedelics, and the optimistic wave of freedom that once engulfed the nation began to dissipate. But the influence of counterculture artists like the Beatles and Bob Dylan had already rippled through the hearts and minds of people across the country. One of them would be regarded as the greatest inventor of his time, a high school student in Palo Alto, California, named Steve Jobs. In 1972, while walking around a wheat field, Jobs had a life-altering psychedelic trip on LSD. He regarded this as one of the most wonderful experiences of his life, so much so that after graduating high school, he took a plane to India and embarked on a 7-month-long journey in search of enlightenment. And he might have found it. In those days, computers were used exclusively by governments and businesses, taking up entire floors and office spaces for just a few megabytes of data. But Jobs had a radical new idea of how computers could be used in the future. He viewed the computer as a tool for the mind.
But fortunately, someone at Scientific American was insightful enough to test man with a bicycle. And man with a bicycle won. Twice as good as the Condor, all the way off the list. And what it showed was that man as a tool maker has the ability to make a tool to amplify an inherent ability that he has. And that's exactly what we're doing here. It's exactly what we're doing here.
It's important to know that Steve Jobs was anything but your typical businessman. To begin with, his biological parents never raised him. As a baby, Steve was adopted by Paul Jobs and Clara Hagopian, who he emphatically claimed as his real parents. As a child, Jobs' adoptive father taught him to tinker with electronics in the garage. By high school, Jobs was experimenting with cannabis and LSD. In college, he famously walked around campus barefoot. And curiously, he even ate an exclusively fruit-based diet for a time. Jobs was also deeply inspired by the musical artists that he looked up to.
You know, I think of most things in life as either a Bob Dylan or a Beatles song. But there's that one line in that one Beatles song, you and I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead. And that's clearly true here.
In short, Steve Jobs embodied a combination of the free-spirited hippie and the genius engineer, and Jobs' skill set would prove to be instrumental in changing the world. Following his trip to India, Jobs partnered with his best friend Steve Wozniak, who was able to drastically reduce the size of computers by designing space-efficient circuit boards. With Jobs as the visionary and Wozniak as the manufacturer, the two started a company together. They decided on a simple, fun-spirited name, Apple. Working out of a garage and using minimal parts, the two created their first computer, a circuit board attached to a piece of wood named the Apple I. It was sold to retailers for the price of $666.66. Wozniak liked repeating numbers, and apparently was unaware of the implications of the devil's number. In '77, Apple released its first mass-marketed computer, the Apple II, which owed much of its success to the program VizCalc, a user-friendly spreadsheet. By the early '80s, Apple became a pioneer of the consumer electronics industry, but everything that came before would pale in comparison to what Steve Jobs and his team would unveil next.
All of the images you are about to see on the large screen will be generated by what's in that bag.
In a time when computer displays were a black void of text commands, the Macintosh's mouse and cursor personalized the computer. Programs like Mac Paint and Mac Write offered a window into the future of how computers would be used, not as terminals, but as creative tools. The Macintosh started a revolution in personal computing, and soon every computer on the market began to imitate Apple. Much of the Macintosh's success is owed to the groundbreaking commercial that Steve Jobs came up with.
We created some award-winning work, including the commercial voted the best ad ever made in 1984.
But this success was short-lived. Although the Macintosh changed the industry, its high price point led to a decline in sales by 1985. In response, a change in management by Apple's board of directors ultimately decided to fire Steve Jobs from his own company. Despite this setback, Jobs' vision of computers reaching the homes of people around the world was coming to fruition. During that same time, another vision of the future was forming. A vision not of products, but of concepts.
We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere, may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity.
As personal computers became a household product, a vast network of ideas and information began to take shape. Author William Gibson called this growing network cyberspace. Cyberspace offered its users a digital world full of possibilities. One of these early users would be instrumental in shaping this new world. After attending Timothy Leary's lectures in the 60s, a young poet named John Perry Barlow took interest in the counterculture movement, becoming a co-writer for the Grateful Dead. By the 1980s, the idealism of the counterculture movement was a distant memory from a bygone era. Taking its place was a wave of conformity under Reagan's America. But with the emergence of cyberspace, the LSD-inspired rebellion of John Barlow and the hippies found a new movement. If personal computers were a tool for the mind, Barlow imagined cyberspace as a society for the mind. His ideas of a free internet culminated into creating the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which would go on to be one of the leading organizations defending free speech and fighting illegal surveillance online. In 1996, Barlow published these ideas in the form of a manifesto titled The Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. Where Steve Jobs was the combination of a visionary and a pragmatist, John Barlow was purely an idealist. The counterculture's dreams of a free utopia lived on in Barlow's vision of the future. And for a moment in history, those dreams would be fulfilled on the internet. While the internet was growing, Apple was shrinking. Since Steve Jobs' departure from the company in 1985, innovation in the computer industry had largely stagnated. Apple, like its competitors, was in the business of selling beige boxes to a niche market. It's hard to imagine now, but in the 90s, Apple was the underdog, holding on to only 11% of the computer market. By 97, Apple was only 90 days away from bankruptcy, so as a last-ditch effort, the company returned to its roots and rejoined with its founder, Steve Jobs.
Somebody taught me a long time ago a very valuable lesson, which is if you do the right things on the top line, the bottom line will follow. And what they meant by that was if you get the right strategy, if you have the right people, and if you have the right culture at your company, you'll do the right products, you'll do the right marketing, you'll do the right things logistically and in manufacturing and distribution. And if you do all those things right, the bottom line will follow.
Realizing that the company was on the brink of collapse, Jobs decided to simplify Apple's business model. He staked everything on a computer designed to connect the average person with the internet. The result was Apple's first device bearing the I in its name, a single letter that would grow to define Apple's success in the coming years.
I also means some other things to us. We are a personal computer company, and although this product is born to network, it also is a beautiful standalone product. And iMac comes from the marriage of the excitement of the internet with the simplicity of Macintosh.
The iMac shattered the mold that Apple found itself in. And just like with his 1984 ad, Jobs launched with it a bold new campaign of nonconformity. What followed was the greatest comeback in the history of corporate America.
Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits. The rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Beyond selling a product, Jobs' goal was to inspire the next generation. And he did exactly that. I can still remember walking into my school's computer lab for the first time and seeing rows of bright, candy-colored iMacs. And on the walls were black and white posters of Kermit the Frog and Gandhi with the same simple message printed across them. Those images of inspiring figures accompanied by those two simple words made me feel that going against the grain was something to be celebrated. The iMac started an era of internet-based innovation at the company, and soon I noticed my classmates were enamored with a shiny new Apple product, the iPod Nano. Anytime I saw a kid with one, I was instantly fascinated by their strange-looking alien device that could play hundreds of songs.
1,000 songs in your pocket. Impossibly small.
And as a result, the iPod quickly grew to dominate the market. But while Apple was finding success in a new industry, its CEO was facing a health crisis. In 2004, Steve Jobs announced to his company that he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. After 9 months of delay, Jobs underwent surgery and had the tumor removed. The cancer diagnosis raised questions about Jobs' health and his future at the company. But for now, Jobs and Apple had much to celebrate.
And I think you're going to be seeing a whole lot more of these great Apple products.
Apple's immense success with the iPod and iMac came as a result of capitalizing off a much larger phenomenon. In the early 2000s, the internet was experiencing an age of free expression that surpassed even John Barlow's wildest dreams. People from around the world gathered in online forums and chat rooms to share ideas and socialize with each other, myself included. I first started using the internet as a kid in 2005. I would obsessively check forum threads on my parents' computer for replies from other people, intrigued by how strangers across the net might react to my posts. Every forum had its own style and its own members, and no two websites were quite the same. Each day on the web would be a different experience of surfing the net and finding new and interesting communities. Even though people acted anonymously, it was easy to build up reputations and friendships with others. That's because websites designed like this catered to individuality, not conformity or hive minds. The novelty of communicating with people who shared the same interests as me in an online space completely changed my perception of the world, and it's likely why I'm making this video right now. In the same way that psychedelics seemed to free the minds of the hippies, the internet also felt like an escape from reality. The internet and Apple were both experiencing a golden age of innovation, but soon their paths would converge, and everything that had been built up before would come crashing down.
The universe is complexifying faster and faster. Epoch, a time will come when this rate of complexification is occurring so rapidly that it will become itself the overwhelming phenomena in the world of three-dimensional space and time. And I call this the omega point, or the transcendental object at the end of history.
And we are calling it iPhone.
The Macintosh reinvented the personal computer, and the iPod reinvented the music industry, so it was only logical that the iPhone would reinvent the phone. But it accomplished far more than just that. The iPhone did away with clunky keyboards and styluses. Instead, your finger was the tool and the screen a portal. Not only did it revolutionize phones, but it became the first truly universal device. After seeing the iPhone reveal in 2007, I distinctly remember Steve Jobs claiming that, unlike any other phone at the time, the iPhone wouldn't have a scaled-down version of the internet, it would have the entire internet.
And rather than just give you a WAP version of the New York Times, rather than give you this wrapped version all around, we're showing you the whole New York Times website, and there it is.
As a desktop user, this didn't make any sense to me. How could a tiny phone screen possibly display entire web pages, let alone allow you to navigate them? The answer was deceptively simple. The iPhone didn't adapt to the internet adapted to it. In place of websites, people turned to apps.
Apple is the largest mobile devices company in the world now. It's amazing.
Following record-breaking sales numbers of the iPhone, Apple continued to dominate the market of smart devices with the iPad and the iPhone's successors. All the while, Steve Jobs' health was continuing to deteriorate. During a keynote presentation in June of 2008, Jobs appeared dramatically thinner and more frail. Concerns about Jobs' health only grew after he took a leave of absence and appointed Tim Cook as Apple's CEO. Despite his advancing cancer, Jobs still took center stage and introduced products in a way that only he could. His final keynote presentation was on the iCloud. After 7 years of battling cancer, Steve Jobs passed away on October 5th, 2011, leaving behind a legacy as the greatest visionary of his time. Although he was gone, the tools Jobs created with Apple set into motion the beginnings of a new age. As the modern-day forbidden fruit, the iPhone offered all the knowledge of human achievement within the palm of your hand, and consumers couldn't resist taking a bite of the apple. Within a decade of the iPhone's release, smartphones found their way into the hands of over 3 billion people and counting. What Apple had created was a universal device that functioned not only as a phone or computer, but as an extension of the human mind.
But in general, what we're doing is we're building tools that amplify a human ability.
If you get the right strategy, if you have the right people, and if you have the right culture at your company, you'll do the right products, you'll do the right marketing, you'll do the right things logistically and in manufacturing and distribution. And if you do all those things right, the bottom line will follow.
Whether he realized it or not, what Steve Jobs was saying about culture affecting companies was also true of society at large. While Apple was successful creating innovative products, those products were creating a culture all their own. And that culture would trickle down onto the rest of society in unexpected ways.
This is how you enter the App Store.
And this is how you browse over 1,000 new apps. And this is how you download one, right to your phone. And this is when you realize this is going to change
everything.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies, tax collection schemes, what have you. It is not your friend. It insults you. It disempowers you. It uses and abuses you. None of us are well treated by culture.
Smartphones brought with them the promise of a world in which information would be accessible to anyone, anytime, and anywhere. But with the age of apps, something was lost along the way. Gone were the days of surfing the web and gathering on small community-oriented websites. Surviving on the internet of apps meant competing for space in the hands of every smartphone user, and it meant appealing to the lowest common denominator. Apps that charged just a few dollars, or nothing at all, enticed customers to flood their new devices with all sorts of utilities and games. These apps simplified life for humans into convenient little bubbles that fulfilled all of their needs. But while these smart devices brought convenience to people, they also brought a wave of consumerism. Success as a tech company meant keeping people's eyes glued to their phones. It meant providing hits of dopamine in a way that maximized engagement. And most of all, it meant extracting as many data points from you as possible. And as it turns out, the most effective way of gathering this data was through apps that catered to the innate human desire to to socialize. The social media giants that rose to the top understood this, and they represented a new economy of attention, driven by data. Data was valuable because it could be used to sell more products and services to people than ever before. From tracking your location to your purchasing habits and even the words you spoke, everything was being fed into the algorithms at the core of each app. In turn, the algorithms grew smarter, designing systems that were even better at capturing attention and creating advertisements aimed at the individual. Personalized advertisements provided consumers with a fantasy of individualism. It convinced people that their tastes and desires were unique, but in reality, they were a part of a feedback loop of data in which the consumers themselves had become the product. Capitalizing off all this were the four horsemen of the apocalypse: Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple, which rapidly grew into the largest companies in history.
Now to a major milestone, Apple becoming the first publicly traded company in the world to hit $1 trillion in net worth.
With Google expanding its networks, Facebook controlling social media, Amazon dominating e-commerce, and Apple providing the tools for all of it, no true competition to the tech giants of Silicon Valley exists. And in the interest of protecting their oligopoly, the tech giants began to act in unison, acquiring any startups or new technologies that could challenge their dominance. Vine was bought out by Twitter and subsequently shut down. Snapchat found success with stories, so Instagram and Twitter added stories to their apps. TikTok captured user attention with short clips, so Instagram adopted the same feature. Each of these acquisitions served to not only stifle the competition, but to increase user engagement. And while big tech is absorbing the competition, their uniformity is trickling down onto the users, shaping them to the same systems of data that guide the algorithms. A post-COVID world has only strengthened our dependence on the internet and the devices that connect us to it. Using the apps we inhabit, algorithms are working their way into each of our thoughts and decisions. From simple tasks like tracking calories to deciding who you're going to spend the rest of your life with, all of it is informed by the apps we use and based on the data we provide them. Information is now so accessible and so widespread that to many people, it's overwhelming. A link between social media use and the rising rates of depression and attempted suicides has been established, particularly amongst children. These social systems work because they gamify the brain's reward system with likes and attention, incentivizing people to base their self-worth on superficial data. In his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt describes Gen Z as a shifting point.
And then suddenly, around 2009 to 2011, in that period, we switched the inputs up so that now everyone is hyper-connected to their peers, massively sharing information among their peers, and evaluating each other, always clicking likes and evaluating things. This is a really rapid transformation in the fundamental fabric of socialization.
As someone who grew up addicted to the internet of websites and message boards, I can only imagine how captivating the world of apps and social media is to a kid growing up today. Research continues to come out showing the downsides of smartphone use, but the truth is, we have no idea what the long-term effects are. And while the data hasn't caught up yet, the impacts of smartphones on people can be seen directly through internet culture.
Has anybody seen my will to live? I haven't seen it since I was a kid. I've even looked behind the sofa.
Perhaps the decline in mental health can be explained by the fact that these systems were never designed to bring fulfillment to people's lives. They were designed for the sole purpose of gathering data. People were never a part of the equation. Every day, the algorithms are conducting a psychological experiment on the masses, and despite all the activism that has informed people of this, nobody seems willing or able to do anything about it. Because while we were distracted by apps, the internet abandoned individualism and embraced conformity. The letter I has become synonymous with Apple. Products like the iMac, iPod, and iPhone created a unique brand identity that reinvigorated Apple while simultaneously influencing popular culture. When most people see the letter I attached to a product name, they associate it with smart devices and the internet. But the I originally stood for more than just that.
I also means some other things to us. We are a personal computer company, and although this product is born to network, it also is a beautiful standalone product.
To me, the letter I represents three distinct concepts that explain where we are and how we got here. From its inception, Apple's message was that one man or woman can change the world. Perhaps better than anyone else, Apple's own CEO personified this message. From the 1984 ad to Apple's comeback in 1997, each campaign embodied the rebellious individualism of Steve Jobs. The genius of Apple's marketing was that it focused on people rather than products. By going against the grain, Apple grew into one of the largest companies in the world. And from their position on top, Apple lost touch with their roots. Their advertising shifted from delivering a message to selling a product. At its core, Apple owes its success to the vision of an individual, but the same company that began out of a hippie's garage ended up becoming the face of collectivism. Since the 70s, Jobs was driven to innovate electronics, and over the course of 4 decades, he revolutionized computers, music, phones, and the internet. But that innovation reached a plateau. Today, every smartphone looks identical, and the internet of unique websites has become a uniform system of apps, feeding people into an endless cycle of consumerism. Algorithms are now mapping out our lives, while outlets for free expression are shrinking. In Apple's relentless pursuit of innovation, the tools for the mind ended up taking control, and somewhere along the way, people lost sight of the third eye.
But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe.
The word idealism often has a negative connotation surrounding it. Idealists are viewed as impractical, unrealistic, and even crazy. But the ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. It was Steve Jobs' idealism that drove him to create tools for the mind, while John Barlow imagined the internet as a society to free the mind. The ideas of both Jobs and Barlow flourished until their timelines converged with one pivotal object that would change everything. The iPhone combined the force of innovation with endless information, becoming the first universal device. As a result of the iPhone, the Society for the Mind became reality, but instead of creating a utopia of free expression, the internet led people into a dark age of conformity.
A garden of pure ideology.
But this is not the first dark age civilization has gone through. History is a cycle of dark ages followed by periods of renaissance and rebirth. Our current dark age falls on the tail end of a cycle that began with the 60s counterculture. For better or worse, the idealism that brought us the internet and the iPhone was born out of a revolution of psychedelics and art. It's easy to write them off as a passing trend, but in many ways, the idealistic hippies were a part of something much larger than the counterculture itself. In his travels, the late Terence McKenna found that cultures from around the world were engaged in the very same thing Steve Jobs had imagined. Only, instead of using devices to enhance the mind, the tools they were using were psychedelics. Perhaps hope for the future can be found in treating these powerful substances as tools for the mind rather than abusing them as party drugs. The resurgence of psychedelics in the public eye seems to come at a time that we need them most. In combating the rise of depression and mental health issues, clinical trials are proving psilocybin therapy to be more effective than anything else on the market. Earlier, I compared the internet to the effects of mind-altering substances, because both of them dissolve boundaries between people. But where smart devices offer an escape from reality, psychedelics offer a return to humanity. Access to these substances is on the rise, and there's no telling what effects they will have on culture around the world.
By dissolving boundaries, which is what they do, they are exposing the cultural operating system for what it is, which is just a bunch of hacked together rules that evolved over time. They weren't sent from God, from Mount Sinai. It's just a bunch of hacked together rules. So psychedelics in that sense spread alienation. But what they alienate us from is preposterous, earth-merging, sexist, consumerist, shallow, trivial, inane, insane, and dangerous. And that's what they alienate us from.
At the same time, creative technologies like blockchain, NFTs, and AR offer another avenue of hope for the future, but whether these tools will be used for freedom or conformity remains to be seen. One thing is certain: if we are to find light in this darkness, it won't arise out of soulless sets of data or algorithms, but from people who aren't afraid to think different. And out of the dark, unknown, anything is possible. Ever wanted to watch teenagers dance to shitty pop music while selling your personal data to China? There's an app for that. Have you ever felt the need to trigger your fight or flight response while scrolling through your phone? There's an app for that. Ever wanted to be bombarded by personalized ads based on your search history? Yep, there's an app for just about anything.
Really? This is what we're doing? Just scrolling through apps? No, I'm done with this. I'm done with this. When I first designed these products, I didn't imagine that some bozo would make apps that just take up your time and attention. I didn't imagine we'd end up like this. This is unreal. This is what we need to get back to. This is what we need to get back to. We need to get back to basics here. Have a little bit of creative thinking. Think a little different.
You're supposed to. Why can't I reach you when I most need you? You're at the beach and I'm in some strange place. Comfort, comfort, why do you run from it? Why can't you keep doing what you're supposed to? Why do you have to go and why do you have to go? I'm in the dark unknown and you're staying home. Why do you have to go and why do you have to go? Unknown and you're staying home. Why do you have to go and why do you have to go? I'm in the dark unknown and you're staying home. Why do you have to go and why do you have to go? I'm in the dark unknown and you're staying home.
Cook ruined my company. Gotta get back to basics here. Steve Jobs was rolling in his grave. Bill Gates should do some acid.